Chimeka Garricks again. Welcome, Chimeka, on stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon. What I say?
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag. Right. Hi.
We are today continuing the conversation that we were starting yesterday on writing in troubling times. Yesterday we heard a fantastic conversation between Marita van der Veer and Musa Okwonga on this subject, and I'm very excited that we're going to get to talk about this today. Now, Chimeka, you wrote 2 books that I don't have here, unfortunately. The first novel is called Tomorrow Died Yesterday. It was published in 2010, and most recently you published a collection of short stories which is titled A Broken People's Playlist. Both books are upstairs. You can find them at the bookstore. I know how excited you are to talk about these stories, but believe me, I am too. I just want to start with your novel. And let me just drop in. This is a novel about the failings of contemporary Nigeria, but it's also a proper genre-bending novel. So it's part a political thriller, it's a crime novel, one could call it a war novel as well, but it's also a coming-of-age story, a love story. And in broad terms, it tells a story about 3 childhood friends that from the Niger Delta, whose lives are reconnected after a kidnapping of a white oil company executive that goes terribly wrong. And in the novel, Chimeka described the devastating effect the oil industry has had on the land and the communities of the region, and the corruption, the failed systems, and injustice on all levels of society. All having its roots, of course, in the violent military rule and the trauma of the Civil War. I'm coming to the first question. So what I think was incredibly interesting, and I'd like to go back to that mindset again, if that's possible for you. You say that you wrote it as a type of catharsis. So you felt a frustration. So tell us a little about that frustration you felt.
Okay. So just for a bit of background, I am from Nigeria. I'm from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. For those who know about it, there's a bit of crisis that's been happening for several years. Some of you know about Ken Saro, who was killed by the military regime. So that region produces the oil, makes Nigeria what it is. It fuels Nigeria. But it's also the most environmentally devastated region possibly in the world. There are lots of oil spills that happen there. There's a lot of corruption from the oil companies, from the government and all that. And in the late to 20, is it 2010? No, not 2010. Like about, when I started writing it was about like 2002, about that period. There was something that started, it was called militancy. Basically, what happened was this. Guys would go and kidnap oil workers. It started with kidnapping of oil workers, white people, mainly whites, and they would ask for ransom. And so they titled it militancy, but it was a very simplistic description of things, because the idea, what was sold to the people was that, look, we're doing it we're trying to get some form of reparations, see they're spilling the environment, they're doing all this, so it's some type of, we're sort of like the Robin Hoods, we're kidnapping these people for money and, we're doing it for our people, hey. But I saw it a bit differently, so when it started, it was like, oh, the militants are people, some of our people were like, hey, let's support the militants. And I was like, are you sure, really? Really? Because this is gonna go bad. It's gonna go bad soon. But everybody was like, oh, at that point I was frustrated, so I'll be driving in the morning with my wife and I to work, and, and on radio, there's a story of a kidnapping, And maybe the presenters will be like, you could see this sort of like glee in their voice, like, yeah, we support this, you know. So, you know, I'm like, no. You know, I'm getting frustrated and I'm shouting like, oh, these guys will start kidnapping their fellow brothers soon, right? And, you know, so that was the anger. And I knew some of those militants, you know, I knew some of them, I knew some of their stories, and I knew they were very opportunistic. They were guys who were maybe, you know, guys who were used as thugs, as political thugs, guns for hire. And when the politicians' money dried up, they now turned to militancy. You understand? So it was very opportunistic and all that. And I could see some of this, you know. At the same time, at that time, I was working as a lawyer, a litigation lawyer, and I was defending oil companies for a living. Somebody has to do it.
So it was you.
So, and like I said, but I also grew up in, like I said, the Niger Delta. I knew how complex these things were. So there were lots of oil spills, and what will happen is like the spills will not be cleaned up in time, you know, and some of the spills were caused by the oil companies, and some were caused by sabotage. A large percentage were caused by sabotage, and we knew all these things, but it wasn't the prevailing narrative. You know how narratives are shaped. The narrative is not really the truth, you know. So the oil companies were spilling, and the oil companies knew that they could get away with spilling, besides because they could pay the government, and besides some of it was sabotage. So they were like, you know what? Yeah, we don't really have any incentive to clean up. At the same time, the government guys were putting money in their pockets. They weren't enforcing the cleanups. So it was a mess. So it was crazy. So everybody, the point about the book was, in my perspective, everybody had a bit of responsibility. Everybody had faults, you know. So I got tired of shouting on the radio. My wife was like, chill, and I wasn't chilling. So I got tired of shouting on the radio and shouting at the radio because, like, you know, and I decided to write a story. It was set in a fictional island in Niger Delta, and it was about 4 friends. One turns out to be a militant, one turns out to be a lawyer, ex-lawyer, one is an environmental activist, a gentle guy, and one works for an oil company. And it starts with when the militant kidnaps a white guy. And as of that time, kidnappings were still pretty innocent. Nobody had died yet. So the premise of the story was, what if you kidnap someone and the person dies? Because it was pretty, like I said, it was pretty innocent. Then you kidnap people and you return them back. They pay some money, they return them back. And the kidnapping was a scam because the guys who were negotiating the ransoms, like if the ransom is like, let's say 1 million, the guys will say it's 1.5 million, it's 2 million. They put their, you know. So it was all a scam, right? You know, so there was money to be made from the whole racket, you know. And so my question was like, what if someone died? I started writing the book. Nobody had died yet. So that premise, it took me like, to say 4 years to write the book. By the time I finished writing the book, people had died. You know, so in the story, the guy dies accidentally, and it all goes downhill from there. You understand? So that was it, and it was complicated. There's a court scene. One of the questions I struggle with is like when they ask me what genre of fiction is this, I'm like, I don't know, because there's a court scene, you know. So they say, oh, it's a legal thriller. Lawyers who have read it say, oh, it's a legal thriller. I'm like, I like the court scene. You remind me of John Grisham. I'm like, yeah, I don't have John Grisham's money, you know. So, you know, so it's all of that, but basically it's a story of friendship. Basically, it's a story of friendship between 4 guys who were childhood friends and how these events shaped their lives when they became adults, you know, and all that, you know. So that's it.
True, but based on true stories, then that you.
No, not really true stories.
Okay.
I knew some of the militants. I knew some of the guys who were militants.
But the setting is very true.
The setting is true.
The Niger Delta.
The setting is true, yes. But
Okay.
the island is I wrote about is not is
course.
fictionalized.
As a lawyer, you have to say that.
Yeah, no, it's fictionalized.
Okay.
So I don't get
I
sued.
understand.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But you had a very different process in writing your and composing your short stories. They are a playlist, these Broken People's playlist, and based on music and carry titles of music songs. In fact, it didn't start as writing at all, but as listening to music, as you told me.
Yes.
So tell us a bit how these stories came about.
So I finished writing this. I finished writing the novel, so they, and I'm not one of those people who kind of know what they want to do in life. It was sort of like accidental. So I finished writing it, and I was like, people were like, you're a writer now. When's your next book coming out? So I started writing the next book almost immediately. I finished writing it. It comes out in 2010, December 2010, just Christmas. I started writing the next book in 2011. I write till, sorry, no, not 2010. 2011, yes, it came out in 2010. Yeah. So I started writing in 2011, till 2012.
Okay.
And I go to do a master's, and I stopped writing. So it was and there's this pressure, when's your next book coming out? When's your next book coming out? And I'm like, okay, and I stopped writing from 2012, and I'm struggling, and I get depressed about it because, like I said, I'm not one of those people who plan things. So I'm like, did I just fluke this? You understand? I had that thing okay, yeah, you're just one of those people who do one thing and you're good at it, and you do go and do the next thing, okay. So I was going through some sort of depression, and the half-finished novel is there. No, when I say half-finished, you think I've gone halfway. No, it's maybe a quarter of the way through. It's there. The quarter-finished novel is there, and I'm struggling for years. And, so I'm depressed, and I start listening to music. Now, I've always listened to music. I've always been, one of those things you want to do, when you're a kid, you probably want to be an astronaut or something, just one of those things. Part of the things I wanted to do, among the ridiculous things I wanted to do, was to be a DJ, And the story, coincidentally, in the novel was about a guy who started out as a DJ. So I'm struggling, I'm listening to music, and one day I decide to write a short story. Take the character from the novel. It was just a short story. Let me just write a short story just to make sure I can still, let me just work that muscle, because the muscle hasn't been worked for a while. And I write a short story about the guy when he was younger. He's never going to make it into the book. He's never going to make it into the novel, And when he was 17 and his family is breaking down, I like it. When I finished it, I liked it. And it was an important story because it made me realize I could write again. I didn't fluke this. So I was like, okay, I can write again. So I decided to write another story, another person. And I was listening to music at the time, And what happened was I realized that the music was inspiring me to write. And I'm crap with titling my work. So what I decided to do was to title it after the collection, after the songs that inspired each story. So some stories I use 3 or 4 songs or 5 songs. Some stories I use 1, you understand?
What kind of songs? Is there
so I have a list. It's pretty eclectic, my taste in music. So if you...
I've read it, but...
So just hold on a minute. Let me show you what I have.
Because reading it, some of your stories really sound like hip-hop to me, but maybe there are other...
I'm a hip-hop fan, but just one hip-hop song here, which is coincidental, because hip-hop doesn't... The stories are pretty intense, but hip-hop doesn't really give you that intensity, to allow you to do... So there's a track list. So I titled it a track list, instead of table of contents or whatever it is. So we have Lost Stars by Adam Levine. We have music by Alex Simon and Marvin Gaye, which is a hip-hop one. We have Hot by Johnny Cash, The Man in Black. We have Song for Someone by U2, the best band in the world. I don't care what anybody thinks. Followed by Coldplay. I'm saying it because we have In the City by a guy called Brymo, he's a Nigerian guy. I put a spell on you by Nina Simone because, she's Nina Simone, she's a queen. You need to, you put her song there. I'll Die Without You by PM Dawn. Beautiful War by Kings of Leon, another good band. River, Leon Bridges. Yeah, I can see some people like Leon Bridges. Love's Divine by Seal. Desperado by the Eagles is an old group. Who knows the Eagles here? Yeah. Okay. And thank you. And a song titled You Suppose Know by a Nigerian artist called Bears. So it's 12 stories titled after songs. I like to say it's think of it like scoring a movie. Right, when you score a movie, you put song titles, put songs to like certain scenes in movies, but for books, for stories. So that's what I did. When I finished it, I titled it A Broken People's Playlist because the stories were largely about broken people. So you have a track list. And I tell people one of the best ways to listen to read this book is to, when you want to start a story, listen to the song, read the story, then listen to the song again, So it helps people. I'm happy to say that it helps people like appreciate some old songs that, like people didn't know Johnny Cash, which is a shame. Many people from where I'm from didn't know Johnny Cash. I was like, Jesus, you guys need to, I'm helping you people. I'm providing a service here, Yeah, if you're good.
So it's it sounds like an experiment, but it's really these are brilliant stories. You should all read at least one or two of them. And it was for you also really freeing your depression. I won't call it depression, but it was a good experience also for you to write these songs. So when you were composing the stories, were you surprised sometimes of the characters that came out of it or the stories at all, or was it just fluently because you had the music already in mind and it was really like more of a flow of writing?
So some stories were easy to write, or one story was easy to write. The story by In the City by Brymo. I just heard the song for the first time. It was on YouTube because it's not even on Spotify or anything. I don't think it's on Spotify. It was on YouTube. I just heard the song and the story. I sort of like had the story in my head. So what happens, like, I have the stories in my head, and the songs will just sort of like unlock the stories, right? And I'm a very slow writer. I write with, I can write a story over like a course of months, you understand? And I hear this song by Bears, by Brymo, In the City, and immediately it clicks, and I just start writing. And it's a story that the time sequences were, in terms of the technical work of it, the story, it was not lateral time. It was just moving these pieces back and forth. Think Pulp Fiction, it was like back and forth, very different pieces, time pieces. And that's how I wrote it. And it just came. And I wrote it in a day and a half. Just sat down and I wrote it, like fastest story I wrote.
Wow. Okay.
The rest were like drawn out over weeks and all that. And sometimes a lyric here, sometimes just.
So it's kind of a recommendation also for other writers that are stuck in their novels. Listen to
music
good music.
helps. Music helps. You don't all have to drink. Music helps.
And it's also healthier to listen to music. It seems that most of your stories in this playlist they turn away from explicitly political conflicts as compared to your novel you presented before, and towards more the private ones. So it's a lot about relationships. Sometimes it's really brutal, and there's a lot of there's also violence in the stories, but you don't shy away from also really getting into the relationships and discovering the very private intimacy, relationships between people in general and society in a broader sense. Can you talk a bit maybe about this importance of writing about especially broken relationships.
Yeah.
If it's not too private question.
Let me go back to this one.
Yeah.
Like I said, the novel was about 4 friends, right? But because it was set in the Niger Delta, and the Niger Delta is a politically charged topic, it's a very complex topic. So whenever I went for readings, people would come and ask me questions about the Niger Delta. They would ask me stuff like, what can we do? How can we solve the Niger Delta issue, the Niger Delta problem? And I'm like, I'm not your politician, dude. Like the politicians have the answers, so people would ask me, I think there was a question someone was asked yesterday, do you think writing would change the world? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Because, for example, so people read the book, your book, if we give it to the government people to, they will see it, they'll read it, and they would make a change. And I'm like, no. There is so there's a Ken Saro-Wiwa, for those who know Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was killed by the government, by the military regime years ago. His people, the Ogoni people, their land has been devastated by the worst form of pollution. And there's a UNDP report a detailed report about how to clean up Ogoni land. It's a detailed report. It's been there for years, and the Nigerian government hasn't done anything. So you think after reading Tomorrow That Ideas Today, when you have the UNDP report that tells you the specific steps to take, you think reading Tomorrow That Ideas Today is going to make you go and clean up Ogoni land? I don't think so. I wish it would, but it's not going to happen. I didn't see it happening. So the story is kept on, people just kept on talking about Niger Delta. I'm like, and I got tired of being the Niger Delta writer because I didn't want to talk about, I was tired of the politics of it. So this collection of short stories, I was deliberate, it's still set in Port Harcourt, the city I'm from, but it is about relationships. Because one of the things that sort of pisses me off or irritates me a bit is for African writers, there's this sort of expectation that we would be political in almost everything. We would have some deep, our stories are meant to have some deep meanings or some, I don't see anybody asking John Grisham about his views on Trump or anything. I don't see anybody asking E.L. James about Boris Johnson. So why are you going to ask me? Why are you putting that expectation on me? I want to write about, just like we're all human beings. We all have the same aspirations. We want our children to grow up. We want the best for our kids. We want to have, a little wine. Some people want to cheat on their wives or husbands. Whatever works for you. We're just the same all over the world. And I just want to show that, look, Africans, just like anybody else, we just have this relationship, this relationship dynamics. So it was deliberate about it. I was very deliberate about this in the Broken People's playlist. I'm not going to be the Niger Delta writer. Yes, I'm from Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt plays a key role in both books, but I'm not I'm bigger than that. I'm slightly more than that.
Thank you. Chimeka will now read us a bit from the story called Music as a little preview.
Is it music? Okay. So this is page 125 for those who have the book. It's titled.
You can read along.
Well, I'm going to read along. It's titled "I'll Die Without You" it's written under the influence of "I'll Die Without You" by PM Dawn. The song, for those who know it, it's a very good song. Go and listen to it. And it's a story about a miscarriage, and it's a couple who have a miscarriage, and it's told from the guy's perspective, right? Because you know how it is. Sometimes people don't. Most of these stories, they're generally told from the woman's perspective, which is good, But sometimes you need to hear some stories from a man's perspective, right? So, on the evening of your wife's 30th birthday, you sit in the dusk and wonder where you're going to bury your daughter. You're alone in your car, in the parking lot of the hospital. You've been there for almost 2 hours carrying your daughter. Or rather, you've been carrying the shoebox she's curled up in. It's the shoebox for your old Adidas boots, the ones you keep in your car for when you play football on Saturday mornings. There's another box in the car, on the back seat. The box with your wife's cake. The cake is still there, uncut. Rich red velvet, her favorite. The cake, which was from you, was meant to be shared with her colleagues at her office. There were also 2 cards in the back, also from you. She had woken to find them by her bedside that morning. She didn't know about the 2 more cards you had planned to surprise her with that day. One card was already in her office desk. The day before, you had given the card to Sekegen, her colleague, to put in a place before she came in. And the other card was already at Baraka, where you planned to take her for dinner after work. The card would have been in the menu given to her. Your plan had been to drop her off at work, wait for her to call you when she saw the card, wait for the second call when they delivered the small chops, wait for another call later in the day when they delivered the bracelet watch she had always wanted, and take her to Baraka after work. But her water broke that morning, in the middle of rush hour traffic on a bar road, worsened by a freak accident involving an overturned trailer sprawled out drunk and cutting the 4 lanes down to 1. You had both sat, squeezed hands, and prayed as the wet mark on her seat spread slowly. To escape the gridlock, you had driven gently on the curb, oblivious to the causes of the pedestrians. At the hospital, you were calm when they told you that they couldn't find a heartbeat. And when they said they had to evacuate your daughter from her, you had simply nodded. She had started crying, softly at first, then in piercing wails that echoed off the hospital's walls and curdled blood. As you held her, told her it would be okay, that another baby would come, you realized you were bullshitting. It had taken 5 years of marriage and 2 IVFs to get this first pregnancy, despite doctors reiterating that you were both healthy. She had borne all of the suffering, the probing and poking by doctors, the numerous injections, and the painful egg aspirations. All you had to do was produce sperm samples. And every time she had even helped blow you because you had an inexplicable and ridiculous mental block which made it impossible to wank in a fertility clinic. Back at the hospital, you had gone numb for the next few hours through securing a room, calling her sisters, going back home to pack a bag for her, and the surgery. It was after the surgery, when she was still groggy, being forced over by her sisters, that one of the doctors tapped you on the shoulder and led you out of the room. Sorry to bring this up now, but we need your decision on how to dispose on what to do with your daughter. We can take her if you prefer, or we can give her to you. You took her. They had brought her out intact. They cleaned her as best as they could before giving her to you. She was 25 weeks old. They said she was big. That she looked 29 weeks. Sorry. She was swaddled in the hospital blanket, ashen, eyes closed, fists clenched, a slight but determined scowl as if death had been a minor irritation which she had overcome. Maybe you were imagining it, but you felt she looked like your wife, which was preferable since you considered yourself an ugly bastard. But you chose to believe she got something from you, hair. She was sprouting soft and curly wisps, which you were pleasantly surprised to see. Taking her was instinctive, like most decisions you make. You had had a flash of them dumping her from a truck into an ugly landfill dotted with half-buried arms, legs, and eyeballs, some other miscarried babies. You'd realize how silly and ignorant that thought was, but your mind was made. If your wife had been handling things, you should have asked them for specific details of their procedures before making an informed decision on what to do. But you're different, impulsive. So she ended up in the shoebox, in the car with you. You spent some of that time in silence. You didn't cry. You really wanted to cry, knowing it would bring you some temporary relief from the pain, but try as you did, you couldn't. You talked to her about it. You told her it reminded you of the time when you were 10 years old when your father died and you couldn't cry. You still haven't cried. You told her about random things, about her clothes which your wife had ordered from the US, and her room which was just painted pink on Saturday.
Really read happy stories.
I think writers should start writing more happy stories. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's not that easy. Maybe it's easier to really write about tragedies. I don't know. I'm not a writer, but
I don't know. I think I should write it very happy.
But
there's some happy stories there. Happy endings.
Yeah.
Not really happy stories. They have
especially
happier endings.
And it's really a good balance. This is what I meant also with the question. Now, when you look back, let's come back to a bit of a broader perspective, and let's try to consider what writing in troubling times also means to you. When you look back on both of your works that we have presented here today, how do you feel has your role as a storyteller changed? I mean, you told us a bit about how you went from one novel to the next, but how, when you look back now, because they're both published, and there has been some years in between, so how would you say your role has changed? Or hasn't it changed at all?
So I'm very careful about taking responsibilities that I shouldn't take. I know that I'm shaking responsibility, so I refuse to accept a role as a storyteller. Yes, I tell stories and all that, but I refuse to take that burden. Like, oh, what do you do now? What are you doing next as a storyteller? No, I'm going to just chill, play with my kids, hang out with my family. If I write another book another time, that's fine. Don't put So that's you get the point I'm trying to make. Like, I'm very careful about taking on that responsibility. But writing in this, but to answer your question on a personal perspective, the first book helped me get out of the anger from the Niger Delta thing. Sadly, I was right. The kidnappings went from foreigners to middle class to every Nigerian, aside from the Niger Delta, and those who are familiar with Nigerian news would know that now the kidnappings have gone nationwide across the country. It's now a sport, a blood sport. And but you could trace, the thing we all know about people refusing to learn from history, we could trace it, and I'm sad to say that I was right on that. But I think for writers, it's important to keep writing, especially growing up or especially living in a place in a dysfunctional place, like Nigeria. It's important to keep writing. It's important for yourself, for your mental health. It's important for people who would read, because as much as crazy as the country is, there's also people going through their day-to-day lives, and they need all this. They need everybody's just coming through COVID now, and the lockdowns. People realize how important the arts were during the lockdown period. It's also especially important for people who living in tough times, living in a dictatorship like. A pseudo-democracy, but more of a dictatorship like Nigeria. For instance, for those who know, Twitter is blocked in the country, joining the likes of China and North Korea, in those kind of behaviors. So it's important for people to keep writing, not only publishing through traditional means, publishing online. So for Nigerian writers, I would say, look, write whatever you want to write. If you want to write romance stories, if you want to write sci-fi, if you want to write whatever you want to write it, because people need it. You understand? We all need it, and we all. I was talking to Suleiman earlier today. Like the more we write, and it's a rising tide that lifts all boats. You understand? Everybody it helps everybody. Genre fiction, literary fiction, crime fiction. My guy, you understand? Anything we need to do, just keep on writing.
Yes, please do. Also for us readers and moderators. And I wanted to have a Q&A, but we are running a bit out of time. But if there's one really quick question from the audience, and the first one I see raising his or her hands, I will take, but it has to be quick. No? Okay, Chimeka will be here for the rest of the festival, of course. Both of us, quick question. Okay, then can you shout? Question from Unjaki. No, okay, was just a joke. Okay, so Chimeka's novel are available at the book booth. Chimeka's here to talk and sign them, I'm sure. Also, if you have
if you guys are good.
If you want to private Q&A, he will walk around here and we be available. Thank you very much, Chimeka, for talking to me, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.
And